I don't usually talk about what happened that winter in Mirrordale. Maybe because no one would believe it, or maybe because I still hear the knock every time I close my eyes. 3 faint taps, right at midnight, then silence thick enough to drown in. The first time I heard those knocks, it was 1998. I was 28 and driving cross-country to forget a failed marriage, a job that hollowed me out, and a life that felt borrowed. The snowstorm forced me off Highway 9 onto a forgotten road where I found the Mirrordale Motel, an old neon sign blinking weakly like it still believed someone would stay the night. 25 years later, I went back. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stop dreaming about that night. I'd wake at 12:01, drenched in sweat, certain someone was right outside my door. 3 knocks, silence, a whisper I could never make out. Always room 217. This time, I wasn't just a drifter. I was an investigator, a consultant for cold cases, the kind that rot in forgotten drawers. Over the years, I'd heard rumors, disappearances, guests who vanished after checking into that same room, strange lights flickering above the hill road. Locals stayed quiet, said the building didn't exist anymore. But online forums told a different story. Some swore the motel reappeared on certain nights of the year right around the same storm cycle. So I drove there again in late December, just as the first flakes started to fall. Only there shouldn't have been anything left of the Mirrordale. The town maps didn't even show it anymore. Yet when I pulled off the road, the neon sign was waiting. It wasn't broken or faded this time. It glowed blood red against the snow. Mirrordale Motel vacancy. The same font, the same flicker, as if 25 years hadn't passed at all. My hands trembled when I stepped inside. The lobby smelled exactly as I remembered: damp carpet, wood polish, and something metallic underneath. The key rack behind the counter still held a few brass tags. I reached out instinctively, and there it was, 217. Cold to the touch. That's when she spoke. You came back. An old woman stood behind the counter. No footsteps had announced her. No sound of a door. Her gray hair was neatly tied, her face oddly symmetrical, but her eyes, they were the color of wet ash. I stayed here once, I said. Back in the 90s. Thought this place was gone. She smiled slightly. Gone? Nothing ever really disappears. Some places are patient, waiting for the right people to return. I tried to laugh it off. My breath fogged in front of me, though the lobby felt warm. Guess I found it again? Without breaking eye contact, she slid the key across the counter. Room 217 is ready for you. I froze. I hadn't told her that was my room. Maybe it was memory playing tricks. Maybe coincidence. But when I took the key, the brass tag burned faintly against my palm. The hallway leading to the rooms had changed. The wallpaper was clean, the lights steady too steady. No creak of floorboards, no hum from the vents, just that humming silence that presses on your ears. The air had a taste to it, sharp and electric, like before a thunderstorm. I found room 217 at the end of the corridor. My reflection in the door's brass number plate looked off. The shape of my face blurred, like fog on glass. I blinked, and it cleared. Inside, the room waited exactly as it had 25 years ago. The same paisley curtains, the same green armchair, the same ticking wall clock that shouldn't still be running. Then something impossible happened. My duffel bag, modern, gray, brand new, was sitting in the corner. But beside it, on the little table, was an old leather suitcase. The exact one I'd carried that night in 1998, the initials embossed on the handle my own. I hadn't seen it since that first visit. I'd reported it missing after checking out. The police had found nothing. I reached for it with a shaking hand. Before I could touch it, there came a sound. 3 slow, perfectly spaced knocks, right from the inside of the wall. Then silence. Only the clock ticked on, its hands frozen at 12:01. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The knock still echoed in my chest, though the air had gone motionless. I stared at the wall, waiting for something else. A sound, a breath, any sign of another human behind it. But there was nothing, only that low, invisible hum that seemed to come from inside my skull. The old instinct, the one honed from years working cold cases, told me to document everything. So I pulled out my phone, hit record, and scanned the room. The clock on the wall was still ticking at 12:01, the second hand jerking in place. The red numbers on my phone screen said 9:17 p.m. Time wasn't broken, but the room was. I stepped closer to the wall where the knocks had come from. The wallpaper had a faint stain, a circular mark near the headboard, as if someone had pressed hard against it from the other side. I knocked back once, softly. For a second, silence. Then, unbelievably, 3 knocks returned. The same pace as before. That's when I heard her. Not through the wall, but inside my head, as clear as thought. A woman's voice, whispering my name in a tone that felt heartbreakingly familiar. Daniel. I stumbled back, heart hammering. I hadn't told the woman at the front desk my name. No one should have known it. The voice came again, more desperate now. Daniel, help me. I pressed my palms to my temples. Who's there? The room reacted before I did. The light above the mirror flickered violently. The air shifted, and the smell of ozone thickened. Then, on the mirror surface, a faint handprint appeared, small, delicate, like a woman's. I took one slow step forward. The handprint melted away. In its place, words formed, written in condensation. Look under. I crouched before I could think twice. The carpet was old but dry. I lifted one corner near the wall, half expecting nothing but dust. Instead, I found a small wooden hatch, the kind that didn't belong in any motel room. I hesitated, then pried it open. Inside was a single item, a cassette tape labeled in shaky handwriting, 217/98. The year hit me like a punch. That was the same winter I'd stayed here. My throat went dry. I had nothing to play it on. My phone's flashlight reflected off the magnetic strip, revealing a brownish stain near the edge. Behind me, the wall creaked. The noise wasn't coming from pipes or settling wood. It was rhythmic, controlled, breathing. Who are you? I whispered. The answer came not in sound, but in feeling. The temperature dropped so suddenly I saw my own breath cloud in front of me. The room trembled not violently, just enough for the old light fixture to sway. Then a muffled sob. It came from inside the wall. My instincts took over. I grabbed the cassette, stuffed it into my jacket pocket, and headed for the door. But when I yanked it open, the hallway outside had changed. All the lights were dead, except for one at the far end, where the wall should have turned. But now it stretched on endlessly, carpet vanishing into a kind of pale emptiness. No door numbers, no signs. Just that single white light pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Behind me, the door slammed shut on its own. Something in the wood groaned my name. That's when I ran. Halfway down the corridor, I realized something strange. Every step I took, the wallpaper around me changed pattern faint floral to checkered to decayed brown. The scent of dust gave way to wet earth, then to cold metal. It was as though the motel was stripping itself apart, layer by layer. Finally, I reached the light, and it wasn't a lamp. It was a window. Beyond it, snow was falling over a highway that looked like a painting come to life. Headlights flickered by, distant and silent. I touched the glass and saw my reflection twist. Only half my face looked like me. The other half, the eyes, the cheek, belonged to someone else entirely. A woman. Then the reflection leaned forward before I did, and whispered a sentence that froze every nerve in my body. "You never left this room." A knock echoed again, this time right behind me. 3 slow taps. The third knock landed like a slow heartbeat against my spine, and something in me made a decision before my mind caught up. Don't turn around until you're ready to see what believes you're already gone. I kept my gaze on the window's ghost light, palm flat on the glass, and spoke as calmly as I could. If I never left this room, tell me who carried my suitcase out in 1998. The reflection, the half-woman version of me, didn't smile, didn't blink, only exhaled, fogging the other side of the pane with a shape that looked almost like mountains, and then like a heart monitor's flatline. Another knock, closer. 3 even taps. Then silence so complete, it felt like the room had drawn a breath and refused to let it out. When I finally turned, the corridor beyond room 217 had shifted again. The carpet showed 2 sets of wet footprints, leading away one, my boot tread, the other bare, smaller, angled in toward mine, as if walking beside me, but never quite touching. I stepped into the hall, and the door shut gently, like a hand resting on a shoulder. The number plate's reflection showed me whole again, but the brass had a pale smear where my cheek would be if I leaned closer. I didn't. A good investigator learns what not to get close to. You take the evidence. You don't let it take you. The cassette tape pressed against my ribs in the jacket pocket. An old square weight reminding me the past prefers plastic magnetized, wound-tight, waiting for a head to drag truth across it at a steady inch per second. I needed a player. Every motel of that era kept something, an office radio, a forgotten boombox under a desk, a maintenance cart with a relic plugged into an outlet no one noticed. The front desk was the only fixed point in this place that pretended to run on rules. I walked. The corridor performed its quiet trick. Wallpaper patterns molting from floral to water-stained to new again. Sconces changing era by era with each 20 steps. The hum in the air modulated like a far-off Transformer Never music, but the intimation of it, like someone playing a song you knew in a key your ears couldn't resolve. Hotels have their own power signatures. Older ones remember. At what must have been the distance of a short prayer, the lobby appeared, not at the end of the hall, but somehow from the side, as if I'd walked past a curtain and turned without turning. The brass bell sat on the counter, greened with a patina that hadn't been there before. The key rack behind it shifted subtly like it was breathing. One tag 217 was missing, and I felt the corresponding cold tag in my pocket without taking it out. The old woman stood where she had stood, hands folded, eyes like wet ash. But there was a stutter in her edges now, a tiny tracking error, like a VHS pause caught between fields. When she spoke, her voice arrived a fraction before her lips moved. "You found something." I set the cassette on the counter with 2 fingers. "You have a player?" Her eyes flicked down, then left to a door-marked office in gold leaf that was both fresh and rubbed nearly away. "We keep what guests leave behind," she said. "Some leave everything." The office was small, the way backstage spaces are small, functional, and reverent. Stacks of manila envelopes sat like tombstones, names written in ballpoint, years in pencil beneath, some smudged into gray haze. On a metal shelf, a black portable cassette recorder waited, the kind with a built-in mic and a red record slider that always stuck at the half point. Dust lay evenly, except for a clean rectangle where something had recently been lifted. I blew gently, wiped the capstan with my sleeve, popped the lid. The mechanics felt too smooth for their age. I slid the tape in 217/98 and clicked play. For a half second, only the hush of the room, then the hush of magnetic snow, then a voice. A woman, breathless, fighting to keep steady. "If anyone finds this, if anyone comes back, don't knock." It answers. The recorder hissed, a low burble. Then the sound of a clock refusing to advance at exactly 12:01. Her voice again, closer to the mic. He thinks I checked out. He takes the keys, he smiles, A sudden thump, like a hand over the mic, and the tape distorted, bleeding a pitched whine that made my molars ache. Beneath it, other voices rose and sank, out of phase, like a conversation taking place in a room perfectly adjacent to ours, but 25 years wide. The old woman watched me, not the recorder. Guests shouldn't listen to what was never meant for them, she said gently, a grandmother admonition wrapped around a blade. I paused the tape. Who is he? Her face didn't shift. The room, she said, and I remembered the reflection that told me I'd never left. I hit play again. The woman on the tape whispered, he opens the hatch. He says it's for maintenance, but there's dirt under the floorboards and the smell of matches. If the lights go out, count to 3 and breathe into the wall. It will breathe back. That means you're in the right layer. Then a knock, recorded, so perfectly spaced it's synchronized with the memory of the man behind me. 3 soft taps. The recorder popped, and the tape spooled a little too fast, voice rising, words tumbling. If Daniel comes back, tell him I kept the suitcase safe. My name fell into the office like a coin into a well. The old woman's gaze didn't flicker, but something moved in her jaw, an old swallow, a new regret. You knew her? She asked, and it wasn't really a question. I didn't answer. The rest of the tape disintegrated into a bloom of noise, the way old cassettes do when heat has kissed them wrong. Warble, flutter, then a slow melting of syllables into syrup. I killed the power, and the hush of the room came back as if nothing had happened, as if the story had retracted into its shell. People say this place inspired stories, I said, and the old woman allowed the smallest incline of her head, a nod that could have been courtesy or confession. People say many things, she murmured. Stories keep the doors open. I slipped the tape into my jacket again. I want the register for winter of 1998, I said. If you keep what guests leave, you keep who they were when they arrived. The old woman's smile didn't show teeth. The winter of 1998 is always tonight, she said, and touched the bell. Somewhere beyond the office, a filing cabinet sighed open. The drawer contained only one ledger. Its cover was cracked red, its pages ruled and crowded with names, room numbers, notes in pencil, so faint they seemed embarrassed to exist. I flipped October, November, December. Room 217 bore a single name, written in a hand I recognized from letters I'd never mailed. Mine. In the margin, lighter than breath, 3 words. Accompanied by guest. No name, no description. Just a small drawn circle where a dot should be, the tiniest imperfection like a droplet dried into paper. I looked up. The office light dimmed and brightened, a slow respiration. She's still in the wall, I said. The old woman's eyes softened to ash again. Walls are only the thinnest part of a place, she said. You are thinking of drywall. This is a place built of recollection. Then how do I get her out? The question tasted like copper. The old woman folded her hands, that slight tracking error ghosting her knuckles, and answered as if reciting a policy you only learn after you've already violated it. Rooms remember debts, she said. Payment is made in presence. Go back at midnight. Don't open the door for the first knock. Don't speak on the second. On the third, put your hand on the wall and tell it your full name. And if I do, you will know whether you stayed, she said, and for the first time, almost smiled. Behind us, the recorder clicked by itself, ejecting the tape. The plastic door sprang open with a meek little sigh, a sound so human it made the hair on my arms rise. I took the ledger, memorized the shape of the circle in the margin, the way the pencil had pressed slightly too hard on the vertical of the 7 in 217, like someone's hand had shaken. I handed it back, and the old woman placed it in the drawer that didn't exist until she closed it. "Midnight," she said. "Rooms like this are punctual." On my way out, the lobby clock read 11:54, though the sky beyond the glass was the same uncommitted gray it had been since I arrived. Snow fell upward for a second, then remembered itself and fell down. I reached the corridor with the certainty of a man walking into his own photograph. The door to 217 waited, a simple rectangle of wood and varnish, a boundary masquerading as furniture. Inside, my modern duffel and the old leather suitcase sat like two versions of my name, set side by side. I sat between them on the edge of the bed and rested my palm against the wall where the stain bloomed faintly. The air there was colder, and there was a hollow to it, the acoustic shape of space on the other side. The clock on the wall ticked without moving. 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Then the second hand lifted like a bird deciding to fly. Midnight arrived as softly as a held breath released. The room stilled, even the hum, even the subsonic language of the building's bones. Then, exactly as promised, the first knock came, and every part of me that wanted to survive told me to move, to speak, to answer. I didn't. The second knock landed and pulled words into my throat like thread through a needle. I held them there and swallowed. Silence gathered, approving or considering. Then the third knock, patient and exact. I placed my hand flat against the cold and gave the room my name. The wall was colder than any winter, and for a moment it felt porous under my palm, as if it were breathing inward through 1,000 thin mouths, waiting to hear what I would admit about myself. "My name is Daniel Hart," I said, and the syllables slid into the plaster like a key into a lock that knew my fingerprints before my fingers were born. The first response was not sound but subtraction. The room's hum folded away. The clock's stuck tick unhooked from the air. The faint electricity of fear stepped back like a tide. Then came the added thing, small at first, a thread tug on the skin between my shoulder blades, the way a child pulls a sleeve without wanting to startle. A whisper traveled through bone more than air. "Daniel." Not a question. The kind of knowing you don't earn. "I hear you," I said, refusing to whisper back. Whispering concedes territory. "Where are you?" The wall cooled further, pulling heat out of my hand like a fever stone. "Between," the voice said, and my own breath stuttered so hard my teeth clicked. "Between what?" I asked. "Between the nights they repeat and the morning that didn't." The stain near the headboard darkened, not with moisture, but with depth, as if the wall had discovered an extra inch of space inside itself. I pressed harder. Something pressed back, a small, trembling pressure that made my throat close. "Count," she said, and then, "When the lights go out?" They did, without ceremony. Room 217 vanished so completely, I thought for a second I'd gone blind. Instinct measured the darkness anyway. 1, 2, 3. On the third, I inhaled against the wall and felt it inhale against me. A mirror breath, a shared lung. "Right layer," she said, faintly, and this time I knew her voice. It wore the same cadence as the cassette, softened by 25 years of being carried in drywall. "What's your name?" I asked. Silence answered like a locked door. Then, very softly, "Names pay debts." "I'm paid in full." A shiver went through the studs from floor to ceiling, a vibration like a bowed string. "Who put you there?" I pressed. "You did," she said, and pain cracked open under my ribs, the way old ice goes when someone steps where they shouldn't. "No," I said aloud, because sometimes you have to say the word to prevent it from laying down roots. But she was already moving, or whatever counted as movement. They're sliding along joists and wire runs, turning at angles human bodies don't turn. The bed springs sighed once in the dark. The clock's second hand lifted again to 12:01 and stayed. The lights came back wrong by half a wavelength, a fraction too blue. My palm still on the wall, I pictured the hatch beneath the carpet, the maintenance space the cassette mentioned. I let go and went to my knees, fingers finding the seam more easily this time, as if the room had moved it closer to me out of pity or impatience. The hatch opened with a breathy pop. Cold earth exhaled. Inside, narrow void, cross-braced wood, an old conduit, and a plank laid across two joists like a bridge. On it, a single key notched like a skeleton, and a folded paper tag that had forgotten most of its ink. The remaining letters spelled only OFF, which could have been office or OFF limits, and that's how this place liked its words, usable both ways. I pocketed the key. "Don't go down," she said, and the plea dragged splinters across my name inside my head. "He waits under. You said I put you carried the suitcase," she said, and left me in the wall. The old leather bag in the corner looked suddenly enormous, as if it had been drinking the room when I wasn't watching. My initials on the handle shone weightly, though I hadn't touched water. Every cold case has a fulcrum, the single action everyone misremembers, because the world before and the world after need a hinge to swing on. In 1998, I had checked in, slept badly, and checked out, or that's what I'd filed. But the ledger said accompanied by guest, and the tape said don't knock, and my reflection said I'd never left. If there was a hinge, it was midnight, and it was this wall. I stood and unlatched the suitcase. The smell hit first, cedar, old wool, and a faint whisper of matches. Under folded shirts that weren't my size anymore lay things wound in tissue photographs with no backs, paper whose grain felt like skin, a motel key tag that matched the one on my ring, but with a different number stamped lightly beneath, 217A. "Annex," she said, so close it prickled my ear. "Where?" I asked. The room didn't answer. The corridor did. When I opened the door, the carpet's pattern resolved into a subtle arrow I could swear wasn't there before, pointing not left to the lobby, not right toward the looping window, but toward a thin strip of wall across from 217, blank and purposeless in any normal hotel. The strip breathed. I pressed the skeleton key into paint that should have rejected it. It accepted. A seam appeared like a grin drawn slow, and then a door was there that hadn't been. The tag on my palm warmed. The lock turned with the tired dignity of an old judge calling court to order. Beyond, a stairwell narrow as a throat led downward into a light the color of old milk. "Don't," she said again, "but there are commands that are warnings, and warnings that are invitations." This was both. I went. The steps counted me, whether I wanted counting or not 13. Then 13 again. Then 13 a third time, the same flight repeating with hairline differences. A chipped tile trading places with a scuffed one. A rust streak thinning, then thickening beside the rail. Unnaturally looping locations always try to be perfect. The saving grace is they never are. I looked for the seam of imperfection and found it in the sound my footfall echoed back 1/2 beat too early on the third descent. I turned there, into the wall, and it opened enough to admit a man who knew his shape. The annex corridor was hardly a corridor, at all more a memory of one. No numbers on the doors, only faint circles where numbers had been, as if someone had punched out every digit. Air moved here with intention, dragging the scent of ozone and old paper together. At the far end waited another door with no hardware, only a rectangle of darker paint. I touched it and heard the cassette's voice again, the same frightened steadiness. "If Daniel comes back, tell him I kept the suitcase safe." "I'm back," I said to the paint, and it yielded like breath leaving lungs. Inside, a room mirroring mine, but mirrored in more ways than one. Bed on the opposite wall, window cut in reverse, clock frozen at 12:01, but with the hands facing counterclockwise. On the knitstand, a small pile of coins I hadn't carried since the 90s quarters, with states that had just been minted then, their edges still aggressive. And on the pillow, an indentation where a head had rested for far too long. Something moved inside the wall beside the bed. Not scurrying, not scratching, turning, like a person navigating a tight space by inches. "I'm here," she said, and the relief in her voice was a wound. I put my hand on the mirror wall, and it came cold as a confession. "Tell me how to open it," I said. "You can't," she answered. "It opens you." The room breathed. 3 knocks came, not from behind the wall this time, but from the headboard itself, like a heart trying to communicate through wood. I didn't answer them. I knelt, slid my fingers under the bed frame, and found another hatch by feel, twin to the one upstairs. This one didn't wait to be asked. It lifted when I touched it, the way a well-oiled trapdoor yields to a stagehand on cue. Dark below. A smell older than the motel, mineral and fern cool, the scent of a place that had waited underground for a reason to be named. The skeleton key pulsed once in my pocket, and for a breath I mistook the feeling for my own heartbeat. "Daniel," she said, "if you go under, don't bring anything that belongs to the day." I left my phone on the nightstand, face down, a slab of light denied. I kept the cassette. I kept the name. I descended into the annex, beneath the annex, into the layer that pretended to be maintenance, and was actually memory's basement. The steps were only 6 this time, then a level of hard-packed earth, tunneled through with the straightness of human certainty. At the end, a panel of wood, thinner than a door, thicker than a lie. I pressed my ear to it and heard the ocean. Not water, time. "On 3, she said, her voice now on both sides of the panel like a duet sung by a single throat. "1 for the night you arrived, 1 for the night you left, 1 for the night in between." There wasn't, I began, but the lie died quick. There had been. I knocked. Once. Twice. 3 times. The panel let go of itself, and the room beyond accepted me exactly the size I was. The door accepted me like a wave takes a stone, not with force, but with certainty. And the world beyond had the temperature of a cellar where fruit used to be kept for winter sweetness long gone, coolness remaining. The air shivered faintly with a current that wasn't electricity so much as attention, the charged stillness of a place that knows a secret and is deciding whether to tell it. At first glance, the room appeared empty, but that was a trick of the angle. The longer my eyes adjusted, the more it gathered itself into a shape. A cot, military thin. A chair with a jacket folded over its back, my jacket from '98, the elbow worn smooth where a steering wheel had lived. A portable radio, its antenna half raised like a question. And beside the cot, a section of wall with the paint rubbed glossy at shoulder height, as if someone had leaned there often, listening for a voice on the other side. I said her name without having earned it, because it had arrived the way some names do, on the wind of recognition rather than introduction. Elena. The wall cooled, and warmed under my palm, the sensation of a hand covering mine from a world a shade to the left. "You remember," she said, not pleased, not accusing. Simply accounting. "I remember what the room allows," I said, and some small humor visited us both and left the door ajar behind it. There are beats in a story where the only correct action is to pay attention to the rhythm already playing. This was one. I sat on the chair, picked up the radio, and turned the dial slowly through a field of static miles wide. Between the stations, a clear line threaded, a clock tick that refused to advance at 12:01, cutting the spectrum like wire. I stopped there. "He listens too," Elena said. "He learns the shape of the silence you prefer and wears it. Who is he?" I asked, though the answer had been circling since the first knock. "The room," she said, echoing the old woman's blade-soft certainty. "But rooms are made. Someone taught it to keep." The way she said keep made the hair on my arm stand, a verb suddenly larger than hold, sliding toward harvest. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you already knew how to look for what others misplaced," she said gently. "You brought tools. It borrowed you." Memory rearranged itself to accommodate the new furniture. I saw myself in 1998, young, exhausted, carrying 2 bags when I had only owned one. The second was too light, because it carried not weight, but a promise to return. "You said I put you in the wall," I managed. "You asked it to keep me," she corrected, grief and mercy interlaced. "You thought you were buying time. When you drove away, the road gave you a story that fit in the space where I should have been. The radio's dial stuttered, landing on a distant voice reading weather that didn't belong to this county. Temperatures that were wrong by 5 degrees. Whined from a direction our map didn't share. Over it, very faint, came the sound of knocking recorded a lifetime ago. 3 taps, evenly spaced. The cot creaked in sympathy, the way furniture leans toward old news. "Can I open it now?" I asked, palm against the polished patch of wall. "If you do, you will be where I am, and I will be where you are," Elena said. "That is how doors pay." I tried to imagine an exchange rate for days lived versus days kept, and found my arithmetic wanting. "Then tell me how to change the terms," I said. "Debts can be restructured," she said, and the ghost of a smile touched her voice. "But both parties must agree." "Both parties," I repeated. The old woman at the desk. The ledger that listed, "accompanied by guest." The reflection that wore half my face. The room itself, with its appetite for presence. "Where does it sign?" I asked. "Where it pretends not to exist," Elena said. "In the corridor that loops 1 step too soon. In the stair where 13 repeats. In the lobby where the bell rings before it's struck." She was teaching me the imperfections, the seams that any machine reveals if you watch long enough. I stood. The radio's clock face there, though I hadn't noticed it, read 11:59. Its colon blinking with a confidence that felt rehearsed. Upstairs, another clock had refused to move past 12:01. Between them lived the night that didn't. "If I step out," I said, "will you be here when I return?" "I will be where the wall is," Elena answered, and behind the words lay a road that had never been plowed after winter. Up the throat-narrow stairs, the annex corridor waited with its erased numbers, the air smelling faintly of paper that has been folded and unfolded too many times. The skeleton key warmed my pocket, a small heartbeat hitching against my own. The looping flight counted 13, then 13, and on the 3rd pass, I stopped again at the echo that arrived a breath early. "There," I said aloud, and pressed my palm into the seam of wrongness until the architecture remembered it was only a suggestion. I came out into the main corridor near room 217, where the carpet pattern had arranged itself into an arrow with opinions. The lobby beyond sat in patient candlelight, despite the absence of candles, a desk bell quivering minutely, like a coin about to choose. The old woman appeared without footsteps, her edges stuttering 1 frame behind. "Midnight again," she observed, though my watch insisted it had only been minutes. "This place is generous with midnights. I want to renegotiate," I said, setting the cassette recorder on the counter like an offering. The room kept something that belongs returned. The old woman's eyes softened to ash, then brightened with furnace glass clarity. "Rooms honor contracts," she replied, "but they prefer addenda." She slid a ledger toward me that was not the red one from before, but a thinner book bound in black, the kind hotels use for incidentals and damages. At the top of the page, account minus 217. Balance deferred. "What do you want?" I asked the page, because some questions are better addressed to paper than to people. The column for charges filled itself, neat as a clerk's hand but faster than ink. Presence, it wrote. Vigil, witness. At the bottom, a line appeared for signature. Opposite it, another line, faint, waiting. 2 signatures, the old woman said. 1 from the day, 1 from the night. Where do I find the night's hand? I asked, though I thought I knew. In the reflection that refuses your face, she said. In the room that mirrors yours backward. in the wall that breathes. Her gaze flicked to the next door that wasn't, then back. Bring her voice. She tapped the cassette with a fingernail. The sound was a bright, small coin against a church floor. I rewound the tape to the clear part, to the warning and the plea braided together. When Elena said, "If Daniel comes back, tell him I kept the suitcase safe," I paused and pressed record. My thumb trembled but held. "Elena," I said, addressing the red eye as if it could see, "I'm back. I want you out." The machine ate my words into magnetic dark. The old woman nodded once, satisfied. Now the night can hear the day. Back down through the seam, through the 13, through the breath-early echo. The annex room received me with the quiet of a place that has learned waiting as a craft. I pressed play and held the recorder to the polished patch of wall. Elena listened how I knew that I couldn't say, only that the air shifted the way a person in the next room shifts their weight when they lean closer. Both parties, I reminded, voice low but not a whisper. I will not whisper to a door again. What does the day promise? She asked. Presence, I said. Vigil. Witness. The words felt heavier than I expected, like tools I'd lifted 1,000 times now made of denser metal. And the night? Return, she said. Release. A room with no wall in it. The wall cooled under my hand. The recorder clicked as if agreeing. I took a breath I hadn't been entitled to for 25 years and placed the machine on the floor so our hands were free. On 3, I said, and she laughed once, a sound as light as dust in sun. Always 3s, she said. 1 for the night you arrived, 1 for the night you left, 1 for the night in between. I knocked, once, twice. The 3rd time, I didn't use my knuckles. I laid my full palm flat, and for the first time, the wall did not knock back. It let me in, or it came out. The difference, in a place like this, is where you find your way next. The wall didn't so much open as choose a different definition of boundary, and in that slip of meaning, a narrow space appeared, just wide enough for a man to sideways breathe, just tall enough to force a bowed head like prayer. The breath there was shared mine, and another's long kept turning the air into something warmer than fear and colder than safety. Step slowly, Elena said, as if rushing might bruise the hallway. Her voice was no longer a distant thread. It had weight, like a hand on the shoulder reminding you the cliff is closer than it looks. I moved with the caution of evidence techs at 3 a.m., cataloging every inch by feel. Pipes ran along one side, warm as arteries. On the other, the plaster gave beneath my fingertips like skin stretched over a secret. A light discovered itself ahead, no bulb, no source, only the idea of illumination bending the dark to a softer angle. In it, a face waited, but wrong by a thumbprint. My face, veined with faint masonry lines, features as if pressed from the other side of a thin mold. You left me, it said, without moving its mouth. I stayed, I answered, and the words made new tunnels in my throat. The space widened enough for 2 shoulders, and there she was, Alina exactly the size of the absence I'd carried for 25 winters. She looked both young and used by time, the way paper looks after it's been folded flat and kept in a wallet, intact, forever creased. Her hair had learned the grain of the wall. Her eyes were the only part the room hadn't managed to memorize. They belonged to a day with weather. You kept the suitcase, I said, because gratitude is a key you should turn first. She smiled once. The motion moved through her like a remembered dance step. You asked me to, she said. You said you'd be right back, and the kindest lies are the ones the hour allows. Something thumped beyond us, slow, structural, like the building adjusting its spine to look. It knows we're negotiating, Elena murmured. Rooms like this hate a closing cost. The narrow way trembled, just enough to shake dust loose in a fine veil. The dust didn't fall. It hung, choosing indecision. How long have you? The question embarrassed itself, small and imprecise, trying to measure a clock that refused to move. Elena tilted her head. Since the night in between, she said. You made a promise with your hand on the wall, and the room honored it to the letter, not the spirit. It always prefers letters. A sliver of the space sharpened to a doorway that hadn't been there when we arrived. Beyond it lay the annex room, reversed and patient, the bed imprinted with an absence that matched Elena's shoulders perfectly. On the knitstand lay the cassette recorder, though I'd left it on the floor. The tape was wound to its clear leader, like a tongue held back from speaking. We need signatures, I said. Day and night. Elena nodded once, eyes on the recorder. Give it your name again, she said. All of it. The one you use for mail. The one you use when you're afraid. The one you used before you forgot it. I swallowed. Daniel Hart, I began, and felt the room lean in. Daniel Matthew Hart, I added, and the lean became listening. Danny, I finished, the name a door to a childhood kitchen with linoleum that squeaked. Somewhere in the walls, a bolt withdrew from a hasp. Elena touched the wall with her full palm. Elena Mireya Cruz, she said, and the name put light into the room's corners where it had ached for it. The recorder clicked of its own accord, not play, not record something between. The tape took our names and made them adjacent on an invisible ledger. A shiver went through the building down from the roofline, through the studs, into the crawl where Earth waited with the patience of geology. The corridor outside 217 shifted a single thread to the left. A picture frame in the lobby straightened itself by a degree. It accepted the terms, Elena said, voice small with the kind of relief that knows the invoice comes later. What's the cost? The room answered before she could. The light bent, and the wall exhaled a draft that smelled like winter coats warmed by a vent wool, dust, a sliver of matches. Presence, the air suggested. Vigil, witness. I had offered those words at the desk with bravery I was only renting. Now I took ownership. Then take me for the nights that repeat, I said into the room, and felt the words settle into joists. When the clocks refuse 12:02, I'll stand where time won't. Silence considered. Elena's fingers tightened around mine with a pressure that proved the world. And in return, I said, throat raw, you release her to the day. Something improved. The stain on the wall lightened, the way a bruise makes peace. The polished patch cooled, and then lost its glass, turning to ordinary paint. A line appeared between plaster seams, like the faintest of smiles, and widened to a door. Not a door that was there, because we asked, but a door that had been there and had finally remembered its job. Listen, Elena said. Far away and very near, a bell rang once at the front desk. Not struck, decided. We stepped through. The annex room inhaled and exhaled like a living thing, and then went still, as if embarrassed by what we'd witnessed. The corridor outside received us with carpet that refused to pick a decade. I saw, with the clarity of a crime scene diagram, the looped stair, the premature echo, the arrow threaded into the weave. All the seams the place had failed to hide. At the lobby, the old woman waited with a page already turned down for us. The black ledger carried 2 lines where there had been one. Signature day, Daniel Matthew Hart. Signature night, Elena Mireya Cruz. Beneath them, in a steady, clerkly hand, the room had written paid through, the night in between. Elena let go of my hand, only to pick up the pen. The nib hesitated like a bird at a windowsill, and then committed ink. Welcome back, the old woman said, and for the first time her voice and mouth agreed. The tracking error smoothed, edges true. What happens now? I asked, still braced for the recoil. Now, the old woman said, you learn what you bought. She lifted her chin toward the big lobby window. Outside, snow fell with the right gravity, obedient to down. A car hissed by on the highway, a sound that belonged to a world with roots and exits. And then, because every contract has a clause you don't read until it's too late, the lobby clock chimed once for each year since 1998. 25 bright notes rang through the room, and each one put weight into my bones. By the 20th, my knees shook. By the 25th, the ground steadied again, but the steadiness wasn't free. In my chest, a second heartbeat set itself to midnight. Elena watched me with a knowledge I both craved and feared. "You feel it," she said softly. "The room in you." I nodded, unable to shape more. The old woman folded the ledger closed with both hands, the way you close a Bible after a difficult passage. "Runes that keep," she said, "also keep watch. When midnight sticks, you will return. You will stand where the wall used to be, and you will be seen. Your presence will pay for her daylight. Every night?" The question hung, childish and enormous. "Only the nights that repeat," Elena said, and a smile that had learned patience settled at the corner of her mouth. "And not alone." I looked at the brass tags on the key rack. One empty hook where 217 should hang, and beside it a tag that hadn't been there before. 217A, its edge newly worn by a pocket. 2 hooks. 2 keys. 2 presences to balance a door. The old woman pushed one key toward Elena and one toward me. "Contracts are signatures and seasons," she said. "This one runs until the room forgets your names." They forget slowly. We walked the corridor together, past the arrow threaded into carpet, past the scene that had learned honesty. Room 217 waited with its ordinary wood and polite varnish, a boundary pretending furniture again. Inside, the green armchair accepted Elena's weight as if it had been practicing for 25 winters. The modern duffel and the leather suitcase sat shoulder to shoulder like 2 versions of a man who finally understood what he owed. Midnight whispered through the room, not as a time, but as a temperature. The clock at 12:01 warmed and then did not move. I stood with my palm on the wall that no longer breathed and listened as the building listened back. 3 knocks came from somewhere else in the motel out in the annex or up a flight that repeated. I didn't answer them. Some knocks aren't invitations. They are reminders that the balance holds. Elena leaned her head back and closed her eyes. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The morning?" I strained, and under the hum, beneath the old pipes and the shiver of ancient wiring, there it was. A bird somewhere outside, arguing with the idea of dawn. The room disliked the sound. I could feel it stiffen. I kept my hand on the wall and let the second heartbeat steady the first. When the hour refused to advance, I stood witness. When it finally remembered itself and slid to 12:02, Elena opened her eyes and the world put on depth again. She smiled at me like a person waking in a house she chose, not one that chose her. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," I agreed, and the room, displeased but bound, sighed through the vents like an old judge writing the judgment none of us wanted, but all of us would live by. Morning came like a cautious animal, stepping into the room one paw at a time, sniffing for traps. The snow outside had settled into honest drifts, no longer trying to rewrite gravity, and the highway hissed with a few early tires that sounded blessedly mortal. Elena sat by the window with the green armchair wrapped around her like it had been carved to fit her back, steam lifting from a mug that hadn't been there last night and now was as certain as a heartbeat. "I made coffee," she said, which was both true and not, because in places like this, coffee makes you. The taste was the exact shade of late 90 South diner burnt edge, sweet depth, a ghost of orange rind if you held it on the tongue. "Do you remember any of last night?" she asked. The question was careful, a hand under a fragile thing. "I remember enough," I said. The second heartbeat under my ribs kept time the way a metronome keeps faith unyielding, patient, already naming the next midnight. "It's in there," I added, tapping my chest. Not loud, but certain. Elena watched my hand. Then the wall where the stain had faded to the suggestion of a cloud. It will call you, she said. Not every night. Only when the clock finds its favorite time again. She closed her eyes and breathed in the way people do when they try on the room they're in, testing whether it fits. And when it does, I'll be awake. What do you remember? I asked, and she smiled. More than I should, and less than I want. She set the mug on the knitstand. There were other rooms, she said. Not just walls, places that wore the same hunger. A bus station in Arizona. A train car parked forever behind a museum. A farmhouse kitchen with a table leaned toward the door. Some nights the knock belonged to them, and some nights the motel answered as if jealous. How did you hear them? Her head tilted, listening to a past that still made noise. They borrowed the same frequency. People think hauntings are about a soul stuck to a place. Sometimes it's the place stuck to an hour. We spent the morning doing the mortal things that anchor a day. Inventorying the room, counting towels, checking batteries, taking pictures that wouldn't be believed by anyone who hadn't stood where we stood. The leather suitcase yielded a handful of receipts from gas stations that had changed brands twice since they printed them. A Polaroid of a low sky over a flat field with no note on the back, and a motel stationery sheet folded to a blunt square. On it, in my hand, a sentence I did not remember writing. If I am not here, I am not there either. By noon, the Mirrordale looked almost honest. A neon sign still burned, but less angrily. The lobby smelled of wood polish and old fruit apples, maybe like a place that had learned to sit politely with its own age. The old woman nodded when we passed, as if we were guests she recognized, which in a sense we were, people who had already paid. We're leaving, I told her, testing the line for resistance. For the day, she corrected gently. Come back by dusk. Elena's fingers found mine, and the warmth of her hand felt like proof of the reform we had negotiated out of a machine that preferred debts to be permanent. Outside, the cold bit clean. The highway took us with no ceremony. We found a diner where the waitress called us both hun and refilled our mugs before we could ask. We didn't say Mirrordale or room or wall. We talked like people who had rediscovered daylight, about the current that runs through small towns after a storm, about a song on the radio that had somehow survived every decade since it was born, about how snowbanks remember the shape of the cars that made them. When the shadows lengthened, we returned. The motel sat where a motel should sit, occupying its parcel of earth without auditioning for a legend. Sunset touched the brass numbers on the doors and made them briefly valuable. In room 217, the clock behaved until it didn't. At 11:59, the second hand lifted its chin and refused to proceed. Go, Elena said, and there was no drama in it, only agreement with a schedule we hadn't written and now kept. I stood at the wall. The second heartbeat settled into its work, and the room tuned around it the way an orchestra finds the A3 knocks came from far off in the building, drew closer, then paused at the exact distance that separates a warning from an invitation. I'll be in the chair, Elena said. If the wall remembers a door, I'll speak your whole name. The way she said it made of the name a rope. Midnight arrived like a held note allowed to end. The first knock landed, and I didn't move. The second pulled words into my mouth like a tide drags the edge of a boat. I kept my teeth together and let it pass. On the third, I pressed my hand flat, and the room accepted the contact with the relief of a ledger balancing. It took me differently this time. No crawl space, no annex seam. The lobby dilated around me, and the bell rang from a distance that wouldn't measure. The corridor extended and shortened simultaneously, and I learned a new rule. The motel could split its nights like a deck of cards, and deal one to me and one to itself. I learned other rules as the weeks stepped past, that the repeating nights came irregularly, but always in clusters, like weather patterns. that the knocks changed timbre depending on which neighboring place was jealous, that sometimes, rarely, the third knock belonged to a person with breath and a beating heart. The first time that happened, the voice on the other side of the midnight was a man's, young and cracked by the effort not to panic. "Hello?" he called into the wall. Am I on the wrong floor?" "Don't answer," Elena had told me, and I didn't. The room listened for my disobedience and found none. The man knocked again. 3 gentle taps, curious, not yet afraid. The motel wanted to eat his curiosity and add his name to an old page. I set my palm harder against the paint and let the second heartbeat speak in a language without words. No. The knocks drifted away like a radio station slipping off its frequency. Somewhere a door opened with the clean sound of a decision made in daylight. Somewhere a young man learned a superstition he would never confess to believing and would obey anyway, because it would begin to protect him. On a different night, the knocks were sharp and impatient, and the voice that followed was a woman's, furious at fear. "Don't play with me," she said. "If this is a prank." The air tasted like rain that hadn't decided whether to fall. I imagined her palm on paint somewhere down the looped corridor, imagined the room tilting to show her a door that wasn't a door, and a stair with 13 pretended thrice. "I'm here," I said into the wall, carefully neutral, the way air traffic control speaks when everyone's tired. "Don't knock. Follow the light that isn't a light." A long silence met me, then a breath that sounded like a person reconsidering the bravest thing they had intended to do. The steps receded. The room growled, a low transformer hum of displeasure, but the leisure did not gain a line that night. Elena held my name like a tether from the chair, speaking it now and then in full, Daniel Matthew Hart, and each time the motel had to nod and submit. Names are anchors if you pronounce them correctly. Daytimes became practice at normal, walking the town that barely remembered ever having hosted a motel, buying groceries, fixing the loose bedside lamp that flickered not because of a haunting, but because of a tired filament, cooking eggs on a hot plate we shouldn't have used and didn't stop. Elena stared at clouds like someone relearning all the white shapes between the storms. We learned to leave and return without arguing with the place. We learned which roads took you away from Mirrodale without leading you back in a circle disguised as a highway. We learned that the neon sign can be read 2 ways if you're a certain kind of tired. Mirrodale and mirrored ale. The second made us laugh, and the room disliked laughter most of all, which is how we knew it mattered. Then, one afternoon in late January, when the road's salt dried to white scars on the blacktop, and the motel's windows reflected a sky that couldn't pick a blue, the old woman at the desk said, "You have a visitor," and put her hand on the bell so it wouldn't ring by itself. A man in his 60s stood in the lobby, hat in both hands, grief folded into his posture so neatly it looked like tailoring. He nodded to me and swallowed. "You're the one who keeps the door from opening," he said, not asking. "Sometimes," I answered. He offered a wallet photograph, the way people used to offer business cards. A girl with bright, angry eyes looked up from a porch step. A band shirt from a tour she hadn't attended stretched across her shoulders. "My daughter," he said, 3 years ago, checked into a motel that no one else could see." He looked around the lobby without judgment. "Looked like this." Elena stepped beside me, and he startled as if we'd split from the same person. "You've kept her out," he said, and it wasn't praise or accusation, only the geometry of a fact. "We've tried," I said. He put the photo down, with a second's hesitation, put a cassette beside it. The label was handwritten, shaky, I-17WEST, last call. "She left this on my dresser," he said softly. 2 nights after she disappeared. We don't have a player. Haven't had one for years. None of this makes sense except that it does, and that's the part that makes me sick. Elena reached for the recorder we had taught to listen. The room stiffened. The old woman's hand tightened on the bell. "If we play it," I said to the man, "the place will hear, and it will want." He nodded. "It already does." We threaded the tape. The click sounded like a small decision made well. Static, then the hush of a car interior eaten by night. A girl's voice, less angry now, more alive. "Dad," she said, half laughing from nerves, "if this gets to you, I messed up, but I'm not lost. There's this motel that makes duplicate midnights. Don't come looking in the day. It's not there. Don't knock. It answers." The man made a sound that wasn't a word. Elena touched his sleeve. On the tape, the girl breathed, then said, "If someone named Daniel finds this, tell him I owed him one." Silence, then far away. 3 taps. The lobby listened. The corridor waited. The room, which had learned our names by heart, stretched toward a new one, like a dog testing a leash. I could feel it in the second heartbeat, a willingness to expand the contract, to add a clause we hadn't read. "Bring the photo," I told the man, "and anything that belonged to the day." The old woman lifted her chin at me once. Agreement, permission, warning. Elena slipped the cassette into her pocket and squeezed my hand so the second beat would remember the first. When night arrived, it brought company. The knocks came from 2 directions at once, one familiar as the seam in our wall, one from the west as if the interstate itself had decided to try a door. "On 3, Elena said, and this time it wasn't a ritual. It was a promise. I placed my palm on the wall. The man held the photograph the way a person holds a passport at a border, gently, firmly, with belief. Elena said my full name, and then the girl's, clear as a bell that doesn't need striking. We knocked, once, twice, and on the 3rd, the motel stopped pretending it had only one room to lose. The motel did something it had avoided for a quarter-century. It hesitated. In that breath between intentions, the walls let go of a fraction of their hunger, and the corridor revealed a seam that had never admitted to existing. Air moved from west to east, cold with highway and night jasmine from a place too dry for such a smell. And the neon outside hiccuped through 2 spellings at once, Mirrordale and mirrored ale before, steading on neither. "Hold," Elena said, her voice the kind of firm that makes a skittish horse choose trust. The father's hands shook but didn't drop the photograph. The girl on the porch step stared past us all with the indignant focus of someone who refuses to be misplaced. The first knock landed at the annex side, quick and bright, a young rhythm that hadn't learned patience. The second, from far down the loop stair, arrived a fraction early, like a rehearsal that won't wait for opening night. The third came from the west 3 taps, through a wall the building pretended it didn't have. "You'll want to answer," Elena said to the father, not unkindly. "Don't." He nodded, jaw locked against a lifetime of opening doors when someone he loved knocked. The lobby stretched without growing larger, and the old woman removed her palm from the bell with the delicacy of a surgeon lifting a tool off a beating heart. "This will cost," she said, not as threat but as truth, and slid the black ledger forward, so the page lay between us the way a shoreline lies between water and land. "What do you take?" The father asked, and the room wrote, "Presence, vigil, witness." Then, as if embarrassed by its consistency, it added a 4th, "Promise kept." Elena slipped the cassette from her pocket and pressed it to the lobby window. The reflection refused to show us. Instead, it showed a 2-lane at night, cat's eye lane markers blinking into an endless ribbon. A dashboard clock stuck at 12:01, a steering wheel gripped by small, certain hands. The tape clicked itself to play. "Dad," the girl's voice said again, stronger in the glass than in the air, "if he finds this, tell him I'm stubborn, but I'm not stupid." A laugh, quick as a match. I figured out the trick with the stairs. When the echo comes early, don't go down. Go in. The corridor obeyed the instruction, like a student who had longed for the right teacher. A door unstitched itself along plaster that had always been merely an opinion. Behind it, a slice of night with the wrong constellations, a rumpled bed identical to the annexes, but lived in by a different absence. Cold rolled out like a weather front. "Say her name," Elena told the father gently. He did first name only, then the middle he hadn't used since she was little and late for dinner, and finally the one he'd kept to himself because it belonged to his grandmother and felt like telling a secret to say it aloud. The lobby glass fogged and cleared as if it too were breathing. Somewhere under our feet, a bolt retracted. Somewhere overhead, a picture frame straightened another impossible degree. I placed my palm on the new door and felt the second heartbeat settle into its work, counting not seconds but obligations. "You have me," I said to the motel, without bravado. When nights stack like cards, I stand, the wood under my hand warmed by a degree that cost it something. Elena spoke next, the words we had learned like vows. Release her to the day. It didn't sound like a demand. It sounded like a verdict delivered with mercy. Firm, final, for the record. The room appealed, as rooms do through memory, through appetite, through a brief display of its trophies. It flashed us 100 nights it had kept and fed on. A man napping in a bus station pew. A woman curled around a suitcase in a farmhouse kitchen. 2 teenagers kissing in a rail car that never moved. Hunger tried to pass for history. History refused the disguise. "Paid," I said, and the ledger inked the word in its own hand. "Paid," Elena echoed, and the annex door acknowledged with a sigh of old hinges remembering their purpose. The old woman nodded once, the tiniest benediction. "Paid," the father whispered, and the glass brightened like a morning arriving all at once. The new door opened without sound. The night beyond it folded, and she stepped through not a spirit, not a metaphor, simply a person who had refused to be forgotten by a building that took remembering for a sport. Her hair smelled like wind from long miles, her eyes like a dare someone finally took. "Hey, Dad," she said, and the word Dad broke something open in the room that had nothing to do with structure. The father made the noise men make when they were boys once, and are again for 3 seconds that feel like a lifetime. He put his forehead to hers, the way people do when they're measuring if the world is real. It was. The motel did not like the arithmetic. It tried one last trick, slid the second knock under our feet, tilted the corridor by a degree, made the neon blink a memory of a vacancy that was never meant for leaving. Elena said my full name once, and the balance returned to level, a tray steadied by a practiced hand. "Take them," the old woman told the father, meaning not just his daughter, but the photograph, the tape, the proof of a promise. "Go before daylight explains itself." He nodded, and for the first time, the lobby door opened the way doors in honest buildings open on hinges, with air to a world that accepted footsteps without negotiation. They left with the quiet of people who know they are being watched by something that has not yet decided whether to be angry or ashamed. The snow took them and made no fuss. The ledger did not close. Pages shivered with a draft that had no source. Elena and I stood where our names had been written, hands together, palms warm against each other's proof. The old woman looked smaller, edges no longer stuttering but softened, like a photograph that's been thumbed to gentleness. "What now?" I asked, because questions still matter, even when the melody seems finished. She lifted the book, and for a heartbeat, the paper glowed with a light without heat. "Now you keep watch," she said, "and the room keeps a record of being kept honest." The nights that repeated came, irregular as birds in winter, and each time I felt them in the second heartbeat that wasn't mine until it was. I stood with my palm against paint that had forgotten how to be a door and remembered anyway. Sometimes the knocks belonged to places we would never see. Sometimes they belonged to the same corridor, learning the virtue of delay. Each time, Elena spoke my whole name at least once, and the motel had to count us before it counted anyone else. We made a life between midnights. The green armchair molded to Elena's shoulder blades as if it knew it had only so many years left to make up for. We bought a cassette player at a thrift store and taught it to listen to debts being forgiven. We walked out into mornings and stood under ordinary sky and let it pour its unremarkable blue on our faces until we laughed from relief. The Mirrodale sat where it sat and learned, slowly, the art of being a place that people leave. Before spring, the father sent a postcard with a road that did not loop. On the back he wrote, "In case you wondered whether daylight keeps promises." The daughter added, "Tell the room it's bad at keeping me." The card smelled faintly of gas station coffee and a backseat nap. The room hated the smell. That's how we knew we would keep it. On the last snow of the year, as if seasons take turns at delivering news, the old woman placed the black ledger on the counter and slid it toward me like a plate at a diner. "Page," she said simply. I opened to our account. Where balance deferred had sat like a shadow, a line now read balance restructured. Below it, in the same clerkly hand, paid through, the last night in between. What does that mean? Elena asked, her fingers tightening around mine, not with fear, but with the instinct to brace for joy. The old woman's eyes, no longer ash, but something like morning's first gray, lifted to the lobby window. Outside, snow fell honestly down, and a bird declared its case for a spring we had not yet earned. "It means the contract ends when the room forgets how to keep anyone," she said. "Or when the ones who kept it remember enough for everyone." She closed the book with care and set it aside, not back in a drawer, but on a shelf where sunlight could find it. That night, the clock behaved. Midnight arrived and slid through to 12:02 without catching. The second heartbeat under my ribs waited, then matched the first, then briefly vanished, leaving only one. I lay awake and held that single rhythm like a found object in the dark, fragile and complete. The motel didn't disappear. Places don't, even when maps stop mentioning them. The neon still tried both spellings when tired. The Annex still remembered 13 by 3, and the echo that arrives a breath early. The corridor still had a seam if you knew where to put your hand, and how to stand still enough to hear the wrongness. But the wall in 217 stayed a wall. When people came in the day and asked for rooms, the old woman set keys on the counter and did not learn their names unless they offered them. When someone knocked at midnight, fewer doors pretended to answer. On a rain day in April, a couple in their 50s came to the desk and asked for something near the vending machines because they liked the hum. The old woman gave them 219 and a map drawn on the back of an envelope because she enjoyed drawing arrows that meant exactly what arrows mean. They laughed at the sign and took a picture of it mirrored ale, and the room disliked it but tolerated the sound. Elena and I sat in the green armchair and watched weather cross the window. "Will it ever stop looking at us?" she asked without bitterness. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it will keep looking and learn better manners." She rested her head on my shoulder. "Tomorrow?" she asked, the word now a habit we'd earned, not a wish we were afraid to say aloud. "Tomorrow," I said, and the wall did not argue. The clock moved like clocks do when no one has to remind them. When the last of the snow left and the first of the stubborn dandelions pushed through gravel to declare their jurisdiction, the ledger gathered dust like any other book. Every so often, the old woman would open it to the page where our names sat and smile the small, precise smile of someone checking a lock they trust. On the anniversary, none of us had agreed to celebrate. We drove west without looking in the mirror until the second heartbeat did not arrive, and did not arrive, and then, like an old friend becoming a neighbor, didn't arrive again. We stopped at a turnout overlooking a valley with a road learned generosity and stopped pretending to be straight. Elena set a cassette on the dashboard and pressed record. "If anyone finds this," she said, amused at the ritual even as she honored it, "tell the room we kept our end." She looked at me, and I said my name into the red eye like a person signing a lease on an ordinary apartment with good light. She said hers, and Spring signed with us in word syllables. We mailed the tape to a P.O. box no one had paid for in 20 years. The world has its own ledgers, and sometimes they balance with a flourish you only hear if you're listening for something else. On certain nights, when weather stacks and clocks get nostalgic, a knock will sound somewhere at the Mirrodale. It will land like a reminder and fade like a rumor. The wall in 217 will stay polite. The annex will keep its stare honest. The neon will spell nothing useful and glow anyway. And a man who once asked a room to keep what he loved until he could become the kind of person who deserved to return will put his hand against ordinary paint, feel only the comfort of a building at rest, and say quietly, for no one's benefit but his own, paid.